Okay. Is it recording? Yeah, okay. There we go. Okay. So picking back up. Jacob's 12 sons. One is Joseph. Joseph is the favorite child. Joseph goes to sleep and then has two dreams. Okay, one of the dreams is he sees a field, right? This is a wheat field, and he sees, these are called sheaves. So what they would do is they would take these things called sickles, these big, long, sharp kind of machetes, and they would swing them through the field and cut the wheat down. And then they would go out, collect the wheat into bundles, and they'd wrap some wheat around it and make what's called a sheaf. That way they could move it really easily. They could throw it on their shoulder, throw it in a wagon, move it around, okay? So he had a dream that there were 11 sheaves all bowing down to the 12th one. So he wakes up the next day and he tells his brothers, guys, my 11 brothers, my big older 11 brothers, I had a dream last night of sheaves, and there was 11 of them, and they were all bowing down to the one sheaf that was me. Now, what do you think that meant? What do you think they thought it meant? Any guesses?
Selfishness?
Okay, yeah, that's what. They were like, what, Joseph? Your dad's favorite son, he gave you the special coat. You just think you're so special, and you think we're all going to bow down and worship you. Well, that's not going to happen, because you're the youngest one. You runt. So he goes to sleep again, and then he has a second dream. And this time, he sees all these stars that are kind of gathering around and bowing down to a central star. He even sees a moon and the sun. So he wakes up, tells his family again, and they're like, I can't believe this. And now even Jacob is like, wait a minute, the sun and the moon, is that supposed to be you and your me and your mom? Are you saying we're gonna bow down to you? Now you're really crazy. Stop talking this nonsense. You are starting to feel a little bit too spoiled. So this goes on, and his brothers don't like him very much. They're like, man, this guy, we just don't get along with him. Well, time goes on, and one day his brothers are out taking care of the sheep, and his father says, you need to go and go check on them. They're a couple miles away, go out and check on them. So Joseph goes to check on them, and they see him coming from afar. They said, there's that brother of ours, that spoiled boy who thinks he's so special. And these are all adults at this point. And they decide, let's do something mean to him. Let's figure out a way to get rid of him. So when they see him coming, they grab him, they rip his coat off, give us that coat, and they throw him down into an empty well. Okay? And then they sit around the fire and say, well, what can we do with him? We could kill him. That's a good idea. That would get rid of him once and for all. And then we don't have to hear him tell us these stupid dreams anymore. But one of the brothers, the oldest brother, says, guys, we can't kill him. He's our brother. Let's just think about this for a while. Say, okay. So they head out to the sheep, and some go out to this sheep pasture, and some go out to the other sheep pasture. And lo and behold, a caravan comes by, a slave trading caravan. So back in these days, and we still have this today, sadly, it's illegal, but back in these days it was legal to trade slaves. So what they would do is they would go and they would capture people by force, take them, and then sell them. Okay? And people would buy these slaves, and they would do work for them. Well, this caravan comes by, it's got a bunch of slaves with it, and some of the brothers are back at the camp, and they say, I know, we can get rid of him, we don't have to kill him, and we're going to get rich, let's sell him. So they pull him out of the hole, and they sell him to this caravan as a slave. Could you imagine? What would you be feeling if you were Joseph and your brothers were selling you into slavery? How would that make you feel? Upset? Angry?
Disbelief?
Yeah, just shock, disbelief. Could they really be doing this to me?
Betrayed, I think. It's like that's your family.
Deep betrayal, yeah. Have your own family do that. I can't imagine how he felt. I mean, it was unbelievable to have that happen. But they realized they did something wrong because they say, man, now we got to cover our tracks. What are we going to tell Dad? What are we going to tell Jacob happened to him? I said, I got an idea. They said, we still got this coat. Let's rip it up a little bit more, and let's put a little bit of blood on it, and we're going to tell him that a lion ate him. Okay? And there used to be lions all in this region. Actually, a lot of the world used to have lions. A lot of them had been hunted out. But you look at the old maps, there were lions around most of the world, especially in this part of the world. So it wasn't uncommon for a lion to possibly kill a stray person walking down a path. So that's what they do. They rip it up, get their knives, like a lion ripped it up, put some blood on it, from lamb blood on it. They take it back to their dad, Israel, and say, Dad, we got bad news. Joseph's been killed. We found this coat all ripped up, and the lion ate him. So now they're lying to cover their tracks, and that's usually what happens when we have to lie about something. It's usually because we're trying to cover up something, and that's not a good thing. So anytime you gotta look over your shoulder, like, oh, should I be doing this? If you gotta look over your shoulder to see if anyone's watching you, usually it means it's not a thing you should be doing, right? Or if you have to cover it up, not a good thing, okay? And that's exactly what they did. So they take it to their dad. Here's what they say, Genesis 37. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. Now, did they know it was his robe? Of course they did. They're kind of playing dumb. And he identified it and said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Sheol means the place of the dead. Okay, that's what that means, the place of the dead. So sometimes this is translated as hell, but what it means is just more generally the place of the dead. So whenever we say in the Apostles' Creed that Jesus descended to hell, it's actually this word. He descended to the place of the dead. That's what it means. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Mennonites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Okay, so here's a little interesting. Last week we talked about with Isaac, and y'all will go and watch the video, we talked about the almost sacrifice of Isaac, where Abraham takes Isaac up to the top of the mountain to almost sacrifice him, and at the last minute God provides a ram to be sacrificed in his stead. Okay, and we talked about how that points us to Jesus. Well, here we have these little tidbits that point us to Jesus. In the same way that Joseph left behind his coat, okay, so also, you might remember this story. Jesus, when he was crucified, he also left behind his coat. Here's what Matthew 27 says. It said, The soldiers stripped Jesus, put a scarlet robe on him, and then mocked him. After mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they divided his garments among themselves by casting lots. And they actually say here, and it goes on to say, he had this tunic, like it's kind of an outer coat, that was woven all in one piece, okay? So it wasn't a bunch of little pieces sewn together, so it was very, very nice. And they said, well, let's not tear it, let's not cut it, so that one person can get this. So they cast lots. They said, all right, kind of like dice. What do you think it's going to be? I think it's going to be a 2. And they roll a 2. No, you don't get it. What do you think it's going to be? I think it's going to be a 5. Oh, you get it. And then that soldier won it. So in the same way that Joseph left behind, okay, his tunic, so Jesus left behind his tunic. It was stripped from him, taken from him, okay, and divided among his enemies. So Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. Here he is being pulled out of the well, the dry well. They pull him up with a rope. See the slave traders there. They're going to load him up. They're going to hand some money to them. And he's going to be carried off to a foreign land. So what does he do? He goes to this foreign land. He goes to this place called Egypt. Have you heard of Egypt? Yeah? Okay. Egypt was, during this time, and for a lot of human history, a very powerful and very wealthy and very influential kingdom for many, many, many years, okay? It was well known in the area. So a lot of the trade routes went into Egypt. Well, Joseph, here's what we read in chapter 39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. So when it says it, he put him in charge of all that he had, it's kind of like saying, I want you to run my house for me. I want you to make sure that my cook cooks my food. I want you to make sure that my pantry is full. I want you to make sure that all my animals are taken care of. I want you to make sure that my house is cleaned. I want you to have oversight over my house, okay? From that time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Now, do you remember back to one of the promises that God made in the covenant? Remember the 3 promises that he made in the covenant? Again, this was last week's lesson, so y'all guys, you're going to have to go back and review that. So God promised Abraham, he said this, 3 promises, Abraham. I'm going to make a promise to you. 1, you're going to become a great nation. You're going to grow and multiply. 2, he says, you are going to have a land. I'm going to promise you a piece of land called the promised land, okay? But 3, he says, through you, you're going to be a blessing to the nations. Now, he eventually, what he was talking about ultimately was Jesus. Jesus is going to come from the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, ultimately, okay? But even along the way, we see, what is God doing? God is blessing people through this household. And that's happening even here to Joseph, even while, technically, he's a slave, okay? But he's a very high-ranking slave in Potiphar's house. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate, okay? So he trusted Joseph tremendously, okay? Think about somebody in your life. Who do you trust with all of your money, all of your clothes, all of your food, all of your belongings? Who do you trust that much? Your parents? Garrett, your parents? Your dad?
No, I trust them.
Oh, you trust? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so this is a very select, we only have a couple people that we would trust with all of our stuff, right? This is pretty incredible that God gave him favor. Okay, that word favor in his sight, okay? But while Joseph is in Potiphar's house, Potiphar's wife is not a very good woman, okay? And she decides, you know what, that Joseph, I really like him. And I want to try to sleep with him, okay? I want him to be my secret boyfriend. Now that's not good, right? Because when someone is married, they should be faithful to the person they're married to. So she is trying to, anytime her husband is gone, she's trying to seduce him, trying to get his attention, okay? And one day, she grabs his cloak on the side and says, come on, come into the bedroom. And he says, no, I can't do that. I can't sin against God and against Potiphar, my master. And he runs, leaving his cloak in her hands, he runs away, okay? And she says, I can't believe he would do that. And she gets so angry about that. She says, I'm going to tell a lie about him. So she takes the cloak, and when Potiphar gets home, she says, see this cloak? Your slave, that servant of yours that you trust so much, he tried to lay with me. Look at this. What do you think Potiphar thought about that? What do you think he would do? What would you do?
Seek justice.
Do what?
Seek justice?
Seek justice, okay? Well, that's exactly what Potiphar does. He says, you slave, I cannot, I trusted you with everything. I can't believe you would do that. You're going to prison now. So he threw him in prison. Now, did he deserve to be in prison? No. Did he deserve to be thrown into the dry well by his brothers? No. Okay. Now, this is the second time it's happened to him. His brothers unjustly throw him in a well. Now Potiphar's throwing him into prison, both times unjustly. Joseph's probably wondering, God, what's going on here? Why is this happening to me? Well, while Joseph is in prison, Pharaoh has a couple servants that he put into prison as well. Okay, two servants. One is his cook, and one is his cupbearer. Okay, now we don't have cupbearers, but a cupbearer would do this. I'm a very important person. Liam, come up here. Stand next to my chair. I'm a very important person. I'm Pharaoh. That means I'm king of all Egypt. Sometimes in those days, and actually it happens still today, people don't like a certain leader or somebody, and they decide, I want to kill that person, but I don't want anyone to know that I killed them. So you know what they do? They get their cup, they put a little bit of poison in it, okay? And then the person takes it and goes, oh, my cup. And they die, okay? The Russians actually have done this recently, haven't they? So Liam would hold this cup for me as my cupbearer. And I'm the important Pharaoh, the king, yes, I have my big crown on. Cupbearer, I'm thirsty. So he would pour me a glass of wine, or my coffee, or my juice. And I said, I would like to drink some. But the cupbearer's job, you know what his job was? To first drink it. You know why he had to drink it first?
In case there's poison in it.
In case there's poison. So if there's poison in it, who dies?
The cupbearer.
The cupbearer. So take a sip.
But what if it was like you did that?
Well, he probably had to test it out a little bit sooner. So take a little sip.
You're cooked.
So is there like a waiting time?
Yeah. I mean, there must have been some type of waiting time in that. But this is very common. I've been just recently learning all this history, like English history, and all the queens, like Queen Elizabeth, like they always were worried about being poisoned because that was one of the ways. Yeah, apparently the Italians had mastered the art of poisoning. So part of like, even in the Middle Ages, like this was a thing that rulers were worried about. So that's what a cupbearer, their sole job was to be over all the beverages that the king and queen would drink, okay? And they would test it ahead of time. Well, for whatever reason, the baker and the cupbearer fell into disfavor with Pharaoh, so he got thrown into prison. And they're in prison, and this is a story about a lot of dreams. And they fall asleep, they both have a dream, and they wake up and they're so nervous. Like, I just had this horrible dream, I don't know what it means. And Joseph says, well, I can interpret dreams. God has given me the gift to interpret dreams. Tell me what they are. So they both tell him the dream, and he says, well, here's the meaning of the dream. Cupbearer, your dream means that Pharaoh is going to restore you to your prior position. He's going to have grace on you, restore you to your position. Baker, I hate to tell you, your dream means Pharaoh's going to have you put to death. And then it says that then that very day, Pharaoh called for both of them, and he restored the cupbearer, and the baker got put to death. But Joseph told the cupbearer before he went, he says, look, now that I told you your dream, I interpreted it for you, remember me. Whenever you get next to Pharaoh again, remember me, and tell him my story, okay? He says, yeah, I'll tell him. Okay. Well, he forgot, or he didn't want to tell it. So time goes on. Joseph stays in prison for some time more, until one day, Pharaoh has a dream. Okay? Pharaoh has a dream. All these dreams that are happening. So Pharaoh has a dream that there were, he says, 7 healthy, big, fat cows that come and they eat 7 skinny, scrawny cows. Have you ever seen a cow eat another cow? Me neither. That's a bizarre dream. But then he had another dream that there were 7 heads of wheat that were good and thick and just healthy looking, and they come and they consume 7 sick little small pieces of wheat. And Pharaoh says, what does this mean? So he calls all his wise men and says, tell me what this means. What does this mean? And none of them could tell him. But the cupbearer says, I remember, and maybe this is supposed to be his cupbearer, I'm guessing. I remember a guy when I was in prison. Whenever you threw me in there and I had a dream and he rightly interpreted my dream. Maybe he can help you. So Pharaoh says, well, hey, let's give it a try because I'm losing sleep over this thing. So he calls out this guy named Joseph, and Joseph has to shave his body and he washes himself because the Egyptians they would like to shave every piece of hair off their body. Okay, they didn't like any type of any type of dirtiness, so they shaved it all. So here's Joseph, he comes, he tells him the dream, and he says, yeah, King, I can tell you what this means. Here's what it means. It means that you're going to have 7 years of plenty, where you're going to have, all your crops will be great, all your animals are going to give birth, it's going to be wonderful, 7 years of plenty. But then after that, you're going to have 7 years of famine. Now, if you knew that that was going to happen, what would you do to prepare for that?
I would start stocking up food.
You start stocking up food. Yeah. Garrett, what would you do?
Sleeping.
Make an HEB order?
No,
You stock up food?
more than just food.
What else?
Everything.
Everything. Okay, yeah. Well, that's what a wise person would do. So that's exactly what happens. And Pharaoh says, Joseph, since you told me the dream, hey, you're in charge of doing this. So Joseph is put second in command. He slowly kind of works his way up, and he starts building large storehouses, okay? These massive storehouses to store it all over the 7 years, okay? And look what happens here. We actually have, this is called the Famine Stela. So interesting, in that British Museum, the Rosetta Stone was awesome to look at, right? Well, this is similar to a Rosetta Stone. This is a real thing, and it actually mentions 7 years of famine on it, okay? It's a really cool thing. So part of this is, even in archaeology, we have record of Egypt going through this 7 years of famine. So they have these 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and the thing is, and when the famine comes, all the nations around them, all the countries, all the people start coming to Egypt saying, we need to buy food. So they begin to get more and more wealthy because everyone's giving them their money as they're giving out the food, okay? So not only did it help Egypt prepare for it, but it also made them even more wealthy through that. All right, part of that process is Joseph's own family. Remember his brothers? Now, years have gone by. Those 11 brothers, guess what happens to them? Their stomach starts to growl. They're also going through famine. They start to get hungry. And they hear, man, in Egypt, there's food. Let's go to Egypt. Now, they don't know Joseph's there, okay? For all they know, he's dead. He could be in a hole somewhere. He could be in a mine somewhere trying to mine dirt out. He's a slave. They're not even thinking about him. But they come to Egypt and they say, we need to buy some food. Well, they got to go through Joseph. They come to Joseph, and Joseph's all dressed up like an Egyptian. His hair is shaved. He's learned to speak Egyptian. He might even have his face painted. Often the magistrates, the leaders would paint their face and their eyes, okay? So they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. Now, what do you think he's going to do? What would you do if you were this powerful leader and your brothers come and say, we need to buy food from you? And those are the brothers who threw you into the well and sold you into slavery? What would you...
I try to be forgiving.
You would?
Yeah.
The good man. That's the big thing.
I would like to think that I would have the good grace to be forgiving. Or at least not be judgmental.
Okay? The natural thing would be to say, y'all hurt me, and now look how the tide has turned.
Y'all are turrets.
Yes, that too. I'm going to do something bad to you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm not going to give you food. I'm going to let you starve. You can be hungry. Or I'm going to give you food, but I'm going to give you rotten food, right? He can do all types of mean things. But he doesn't. He wants to test them. He says, I wonder if these guys have changed at all. I wonder if they've learned anything. So he still doesn't tell them who he is. So he says, listen, I want you to bring back your... Because only 10 of them came. And he finds out. He's like, oh, you didn't bring the youngest brother. There's another one called Benjamin. You haven't brought him. He said, y'all guys are slaves. You're trying to test, or y'all guys are spies. No, we're not spies. We're here to get food. No, you're spies. Said, no, we're not. Throw him into prison. So he does. He throws him into prison for 3 days. Just let them sit there and think about it. So now I'm scaring him a little bit. Calls him back out. Says, hey, listen, I'll let you go back, but you got to bring your youngest brother back. I can't do that. He said, well, you better do that, because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to keep Simeon, the oldest brother, I'm going to keep him in prison until you come back.
I thought it was another guy.
It was the oldest one. So he lets them.
No, a different one. Who was the oldest?
Then Reuben. I think it's Simeon. Could be Reuben. He keeps Simeon, puts him in prison, lets the other ones go. So then what would it be? 10 of them, or 9 of them, go back to their dad. And they say, look, we brought food, but we had to leave our brother Simeon here until we go back with Benjamin. He says, well, you're not going to take Benjamin because I already lost Joseph. I'm not going to lose him. They eat the food up. They start getting hungry again, and they realize we got to go back. He says, well, go back. And they said, we can't go back. The guy told us, that leader told us, and if we go back without Benjamin, it's not going to be good. He's fine. We're starving. We need food. You got to do what you got to do. Take him. So they take him back. He sees him coming. They come. They say, look, we brought our brother Benjamin. He says, wonderful. He lets out Simeon. He says, I'm going to have a feast now for y'all. So he sets a big feast for them in his palace. Big, long table. He feeds them food. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this guy's like really taking care of us. He sees all his brothers there. So there he is, the king sitting on one end, eating his, and he sees all his brothers. And he says, I'm going to test them one more time. So he says, I'm going to give y'all guys a bunch of food. He fills up their bags full of grain, sends them on their way. But before they're sent on their way, he tells his cupbearer, he says, take my chalice, my nice chalice that I drink out of, and go put it in Benjamin's bag, in his grain bag. He buries it in there. So they start to ride off, and they don't know this. They start riding off, get a little bit out of town, and then all of a sudden, you see all these soldiers come riding out, chasing after them. Like, what's going on? Stop their horses. What's going on? They all surround them and say, the king has been kind to you, and you have taken advantage of him. One of you has taken his silver chalice. No, we haven't done that. If it's true, let us check your bags, okay? So they check all the bags. They check the last one, Benjamin, and lo and behold, whoosh, there is the chalice. They say, no, we didn't take this. No, you did. So he said, we have to arrest Benjamin. Now all the brothers are thinking, oh my goodness, this was our father's worst fear. He lost Joseph because of us, and now he's going to lose Benjamin because of us. He's going to die. He's going to die in grief because of this. This is horrible. So they all go back to Joseph. Again, they don't know it's him. They say, no, we can't. Listen, we didn't steal this. Really, this was an accident. We don't know how this happened. And one of the brothers say, listen, instead of taking Benjamin, because that would kill our father with grief, take me. I'll stay in his stead. And Joseph realizes when they offer that, he says their hearts have changed. They have learned to put others first. And at that it says that he wept. He began to weep and cry, and he sent out all of his servants, and then he began to speak with them in their own Hebrew tongue. Okay? And he says, I am Joseph, the one you sold into slavery.
So question.
Yeah.
So I guess he decided to help them.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether their heart changed or not. Because when he helped them, he didn't know that their heart had changed.
He didn't, but he kind of always had an ace up his sleeve in that he always had at least one of them in prison, right? Like, he had Simeon in prison, so he knew they were going to come back eventually. But yeah, he didn't know for sure that their heart had changed. That's why he did multiple kind of tests in that.
So, well, I guess he wanted to be reunited with his family. That's why he tested him?
Yeah, he still loved them. And you see that actually it's very emotional when you read the text of him being reunited, and they all kind of gather around him, and there's hugging and kissing going on. So even though he had been deeply hurt by his family, it was still his family. Yeah. So here's the chalice. I forgot I had this slide in there. Look, they're so shocked. What? So Joseph reveals himself. Genesis 45. This is the very end of the book of Genesis. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. What does it mean to be dismayed at his presence? Okay, could be sad. What?
Ashamed?
Yeah, they probably felt a lot of shame. Shocked. Yeah. What? We thought you were dead. We sold you as a slave, and you're in this powerful position? dismayed. Because at this point, they're probably thinking, he's going to put us all to death. This guy's so powerful, he could put us all to death right now. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." See, he sees what happened, even though it was evil. He says, but God worked through this. God sent me here in order that I might be used for good. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. He says there's 5 years left of this. Like, this is just the beginning of it. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Wow, that's what we say. This is a perspective of faith. That Joseph, rather than blaming them, even though he had a lot of reason to blame them, he said, God is in control, and God was working through this in order to put me where I am today. He, God, has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, "Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children and your flocks, your herds and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty." So there they are. They're like, we can't believe this, right? And they're flooded with all these emotions of being ashamed of selling him into slavery, of being shocked that he's in this position, of being relieved, right? Probably in many respects. A lot of emotions kind of going around in them.
So it's safe to say that with this, I'm just making a leap of conclusions here, but this is the birth of Israel. Like, because Israel was Jacob,
Yeah,
and basically he's saying, go back and tell Dad,
yeah,
you and everybody that touches you, that comes from you, that descends from you, are all good to go, essentially.
that's it. Yeah.
Is that not the birth of Israel?
Well, so the birth of Israel would be, so these are the 12 sons of Jacob / Israel. This is a story of how they ultimately get into Egypt. Okay? So this is what they do. They go back, they tell their dad, Jacob, i.e. Israel, let's go bring all of our possessions. It's going to be 5 more years of famine, but thank goodness our brother's in command. He's been made ruler over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Let's go. So they take all their possessions and they move. And we're told that Joseph gave them the best land, the land called Goshen, to stay in. Okay, and that's where they end up going. So they go to Goshen. They move there. A couple of years go by because their dad is very old. Jacob is very old. So this is what happens. This is the last chapter. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil we did to him."
After all this time?
After all this time, yeah. But think about that. Like, you know how this is a very human response. Because they're like, man.
No, not after all that time and all he did for them.
Okay, but wait, I can see.
So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of God, your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for I am in the place of God. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So it is a very human response when you think about how power dynamics work outside of a Western mindset. Again, I mean, I'm just reminded of this. Like, this is a history of Europe. Kings on the throne, and a king dies, all of a sudden all the siblings are out to like kill each other. You're like, who's gonna get the throne?
Yeah, Dad told me before he died that
Yeah.
everything should go to me. I should be in charge.
Right, absolutely, yeah. I'm the special one, right? I mean, this is a very it is a very realistic. Like, this story has been told and retold throughout history many times over. many times. I mean, again, just literally yesterday, I've been reading this book on England, and it's like all these power struggles and these siblings. Like, man, they're trying to take the throne. I gotta decapitate them. I gotta kill them. Like, crazy how much this happens. So it's a very realistic thing. It's hard for us to imagine maybe in our modern day because we live such independent lives from one another. We're not thinking power dynamics and taking over this big inheritance and who's the leader of the family tribe. But in this time, very much that was the case. But notice Joseph's response, and this is what's so key. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God, what does it say? Meant it for good. So Joseph saw, even though it was a horrific, horrible experience, to be sold into slavery, to be thrown into prison unjustly, to be falsely accused. But even in all that, he says, I saw God was using this for good. Okay? So here's, kind of as we wrap up, here's some of the lessons. God works good even through suffering. So even in our lives. Do you know that? Even when we go through very difficult, hard times, we can trust that God is going to use that. He wants to use that for good in our life. We don't always see it. Most of the time, we don't see it. When I'm going through a hard time or a difficult season, I usually don't see. I'm not like, oh, God, I see what you're trying to do. Often I'm like, why is this happening? But that happens in our lives. But God, when we look to Him and trust in Him, He'll use it for good. Okay, this is a power of trusting in God. No matter what goes on in our life, we can trust God. Even when we don't understand it, even when we don't see it, God is trustworthy. Every time, okay? But we also see the power of forgiveness here because Joseph could have killed all his brothers, thrown them all in prison. Because they know I'm going to forgive them. And that then became, this became Israel then, that would continue to grow. And this is how Israel, okay, got into Egypt. So next week we're going to pick up with, you maybe remember the story of how did Israel get into Egypt and become slaves? The story of Pharaoh being over Egypt and all the 10 plagues. Okay, we're going to talk about that next week. But this is how they got there. And they begin to grow and grow and grow and grow, and it makes the Egyptians kind of worried. Okay, so we'll pick up with that next week. But this is a story of the life of Joseph. How God worked through horrible situations for good, and how Joseph trusted God through that, and how Joseph, because he was trusting God, was able to extend forgiveness to his brothers. So, questions about that?
I gotta read last week's lesson so I can catch up.
Yeah, last week kind of helped us lay the groundwork to get to where we are today, but
This is one of my favorites.
it's a great, it is. It's so encouraging to me because, again, like, it's just a reminder, we see things from one perspective. We don't see what God is up to. We don't see the work that He is doing behind the scenes, and sometimes it takes years for us to see that, but we can trust Him with it. Yeah. Which part of this story most stands out to you? It's like the craziest part, the most interesting part?
How Joseph decided to be forgiving to his brothers.
Yeah, that's a really powerful part of the story.
You want me to speak?
Yes.
Ava, what part of the story stood out to you?
When his brothers took his coat and ripped it off and said that a lion ate him.
Yeah. That was a pretty creative way to try to cover their tracks, wasn't it? What would you say?
What would I say?
Yeah, what was the most interesting part of the story?
Joseph in prison.
Joseph in prison? We get to interpret the dreams for those other two prisoners?
Yeah.
The twists and the turns. So the prison is one twist and turn. The lead up to, okay, how do you go from A to B to C to where you end up, which is, the power of trusting God.
Yes. It reminds me of what we were talking about with Tolkien. That whole, he talks about that turn, right? That joyful turn when all hope is lost, and all of a sudden you have this turn.
A divine intervention.
A divine intervention, yeah, that there's no other way to explain it, yeah.
I thought it was interesting how essentially evil or wickedness was used in the cause of God's will.
Yeah.
Because in the past he flooded the earth because of wickedness. And it's now he's well, they're being wicked, but there's a point to it.
He's going to
we'll
work
get
through
there.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Liam? Him forgiving his brothers. to that last point there, I'll just make a closing comment on that. That is how God works. And you think about that is what the crucifixion of Jesus is all about. That God took what Satan thought was defeating God. Oh, I'm going to kill Jesus. It looked like a defeat. And yet in that wicked act of an innocent man being crucified and put to death, in that God would actually turn the tide, right? It would be, Paul says, death is defeated by death. Through the death of Jesus and him rising from the dead, death and Satan gets defeated. So it's that turn, that same type of turn that happens there. Yeah, it's really good. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this, your word. Thank you for the life of Joseph and his faithfulness to you, that he trusted you even when things were not going well. And I pray that you would give each one of us that same type of faith to trust you even when we don't understand why things are happening, even when people do evil things against us, that we would keep our eyes on you because you are always faithful to us. I pray that you would bless each one of us and help us to continue to grow in our knowledge of your word and in our knowledge of who you are. And we pray all this in the name of Jesus Christ. And all God's people said, amen. All right, the lesson I'll text out. Sometimes I like to see kind of how it goes, what questions. I have it all written out. So I'll send it out tomorrow. And y'all can just print it and fill it out. But do go ahead and go back and watch the video and complete last week's lesson as well. So, have you been keeping track of all the lessons that have been completed?
Like the turn-in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to do those today, but then last Sunday I did
Okay.
not. So
I'll be curious. I'll pull out that document and see where we're at with
Okay.
where people are
I'm
on
gonna
the
give this
lessons.
to Esther.
So,
What is this?
It's in the notes.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so we've been taking notes and
Great.
stacking them up.
Okay, awesome. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, thank y'all guys. We'll see you next week, and we're going to pick up with the rest of the story.